Kofi saw the trap before he saw the city, and the trap was beautiful. He had been walking since dawn, the sun tracking a slow arc above the Harmattan haze, while his reformed mind processed the approach on two separate registers. The physical register, dry red road, cracked laterite, the skeletal silhouettes of baobabs stripped by the dry season. His bad knee marking every third step with a mechanical catch that had settled into a rhythm step, grind, step, grind the body's metronome, keeping time against the conductor's approach to his stage. The system register, root lines pulsing beneath the road's surface, their frequency clean this far from the corruption source, carrying the deep hum of the Zagale's architecture, the way buried pipes carry water invisible, essential, taken for granted by everyone who drew from them. A headache had been building since he left the tunnel mouth at sunrise. Not the sharp, diagnostic pain of the protocol's lessons, this was broader, duller, a pressure behind both eyes that intensified whenever his system vision processed too many layers simultaneously. The reformed mind could see everything. The human skull that housed it had opinions about the bandwidth. The road widened as it approached Ironhaven's outlying settlements. Mud-walled compounds, thatched roofs, small plots of groundnuts and millet struggling against the Harmattan. And people. Living people, moving through their morning routines with the unconscious grace of lives that did not know they were built on a dying system. Kofi slowed. A market woman had set up her stall at the road's junction, a wooden table shaded by a faded umbrella, stacked with yams and groundnuts and small bags of dried peppers. She was arranging her stock with the careful geometry of someone who knew that presentation was the difference between selling and carrying everything home. Beside her, a girl of maybe 7 sat on an upturned bucket, peeling groundnuts into a battered aluminium bowl with the focused patience of a child who had been given a task and intended to do it properly. The woman looked up as Kofi approached. Her expression shifted through 3 phases in rapid sequence: curiosity, assessment, dismissal. He watched each phase with the reformed mind's analytical clarity and the scavenger's personal familiarity. He knew what she saw: a ragged man in torn clothes, too thin, limping badly, with a streak of white in his hair that was either premature age or the mark of something unnatural. A depths dweller, the kind of person who wandered out of the underground occasionally, blinking and damaged, and either found their way back to the surface world or didn't.
"Mom,"
Kofi said.
"how much for the yams?"
She named a price that was twice the market rate, the depths dweller surcharge. He had expected it. The depths had their own economy, but he remembered how the surface worked. You charged broken people more because broken people had fewer options.
"I don't have money,"
He said. Honesty was easier than performance, and the reformed mind had little patience for either.
"I haven't had money in 14 months.
Then why are you asking the price? The woman's voice was not unkind. Practical, the voice of someone who weighed everything on the scale of utility and found most things wanting.
"Habit, I used to ask prices before I went into the depths. It was one of the things I did when I was a person."
He paused. The words had come out wrong, too honest, too raw, the scavenger's unfiltered interior monologue leaking through the reformed mind's inadequate social filters.
"I'll be on my way."
The girl on the bucket looked up from her groundnuts. She studied Kofi with the unself-conscious directness that children wielded like a scalpel, no pretense, no performance, just the clean blade of observation. "Your hair is white," she said. "Here." She pointed to her own temple.
"Yes."
"Did something scare you? Auntie says hair goes white when you see a ghost." Kofi considered this.
"Something like that. I went somewhere dark and came back different."
The girl nodded, accepting this with the gravity of someone who had not yet learned to disbelieve. She held out a handful of peeled groundnuts. Small, maybe 20. A child's portion, offered with a child's directness. "You look hungry," she said. Something in Kofi's chest, the part of him that the protocol had rebuilt but not replaced, the scavenger's heart that still beat in the reformed architecture's larger chambers, tightened. He took the groundnuts. They were warm from her hands.
Thank you.
The market woman watched the exchange with an expression Kofi's reformed mind catalogued as complicated annoyance at the child's generosity, recognition of the decency in it, the specific discomfort of an adult watching a child do the thing the adult had decided not to do. She said nothing. Kofi ate the groundnuts as he walked, and they were the best thing he had tasted in 14 months. The headache intensified as Ironhaven's walls grew closer. His system vision was processing the city's magical infrastructure, every enchanted textile, every shadow binding, every root line junction, and the volume of data was staggering. The surface world was louder than the depths. Down there, the system's presence had been muted, filtered through geological layers, a background hum. Here, it was a roar. Every person he passed on the road was a node in the encoding network, their clothes carrying warped patterns, their shadows flickering with diagnostic data. His reformed mind wanted to read all of it. His human skull, which had spent 23 years processing a much simpler world, was lodging formal protests. He pressed his fingers against his closed eyelids. Stars bloomed in the pressure dark. The headache had teeth, now a sharp, biting edge behind his right eye that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. This was the cost. The protocol had given him the ability to see the system's full architecture. It had not given him the physiological capacity to see it without pain. The mind was reformed. The brain was still meat, and meat had limits. He opened his eyes, let the system vision settle to a lower resolution, not the full layered display, but a simplified overlay, the major frequencies only, the corruption's broad strokes rather than its fine detail, and the headache retreated to a manageable throb. A compromise. The scavenger's approach. Take what you can carry, leave the rest for a second trip. And then he saw the trap. It began at the city walls. His simplified system vision was enough to read the broad architecture, the concentric rings of capture fields radiating from the enskinment chamber, each ring calibrated to a specific frequency range, each range corresponding to one of the 4 fragments. Shadow binding frequency, innermost ring, positioned directly around the chamber. Root line communion, second ring, embedded in the junction points beneath the chamber floor. Encoding, third ring, woven into every enchanted textile in the city. And at the outermost ring, positioned to close around the entire web like a drawstring cinching a bag, the unified knowledge frequency. The candidate's frequency. His frequency. The scavenger recognized the design before the reformed mind finished its analysis. He had seen this before. Not at this scale, not with these materials, but the principle was identical. In the depths, the more sophisticated scavengers, the ones who had been down there long enough to build territories, used the same approach. You found a tunnel junction where valuable salvage passed through. You weakened the ceiling at calculated points. You left the path looking stable, looking safe, looking like the obvious route forward. And when your target walked through, carrying whatever you wanted, you pulled the support, and the ceiling came down, and they were trapped, and you took what they had. Collapse tunnel trap. Scale it up from a 10-meter passage to a city-wide magical infrastructure, replace the salvage with the 4 fragments of a unified system, replace the collapsing ceiling with a web of interlocking capture fields, but the principle was the same. Make the victim think the path forward is safe. Close the trap when they commit to walking it. This was the same thing, just bigger. But the trap had a flaw. Kofi saw it the way the scavenger always saw flaws in traps, not through analysis, not through theory, but through the specific pattern recognition of someone who had spent 14 months navigating spaces designed to kill him. The flaw was in the materials. Tohage had built his trap from the Zagale's own medium. Obsidian, crystallized root line material, encoded textile fragments. System substance repurposed as cage bars, and system substance was not inert. It was not dead wood or cold iron. It was a live part of a living network, connected to a living architecture, responsive to frequencies that its original builders had encoded into its molecular structure. The 3-part harmonic that Kofi could feel resonating from the old quarter 3 fragments already assembled, their frequencies interlocking, generating a reunion signal that traveled through every piece of Zagale material in the territory, was speaking to the cage bars, was reminding the obsidian and the crystal and the encoded cloth what they were, whose they were, what they had been built to do. The cage maker had built his cage from bones that remembered whose skeleton they belonged to, and the skeleton was waking up. Ch.5 filed the counter-strategy that was already forming in his reformed architecture, and addressed the immediate problem. Entering a city whose outermost capture ring was calibrated specifically to his frequency. He closed his eyes, the headache pulsed, he breathed. Then he did something the protocol had not taught him. Something the scavenger had mastered in 14 months of surviving by not being noticed. He dimmed his signal. Not off. The reformed mind could not be switched off any more than a person could choose to stop breathing. But the scavenger knew how to occupy less space. How to move through a room without displacing the air. How to exist in the margins, the specific, practiced invisibility of a person whose survival depended on not being the focus of anyone's interest. 14 months of making himself marginal, making himself forgettable, making himself the one thing in the room that nobody's eyes landed on. Now that skill was doing something it had never been designed for. The marginal man's inheritance weaponized. The candidate's frequency dimmed, not disappeared, but quieted the way a candle dims when you cup your hand around it. Still burning, still present, but below the threshold that would trigger the outermost ring. He was proud of it. Not the protocol's pride, not the reformed mind's clinical satisfaction, the scavenger's pride. The dirty, defiant pride of a skill learned in garbage, perfected in darkness, and now deployed against a trap that had been designed by a man who had studied the system's architecture for 20 years, but had never spent a single night hiding in the depths. Tohage knew how to build a cage for a candidate. He did not know how to build a cage for a scavenger. The distinction, Ch.5 suspected, would prove significant. Ironhaven's eastern gate was ahead. Iron-banded wood, flanked by guards whose enchanted armor flickered with the corrupted encoding that every textile in the city now carried. Their shadow bindings were active low-level diagnostic sweeps, automated, probably not consciously maintained. The guards themselves looked bored. The Damba preparations had the whole city in festival mode, and 2 men standing at a gate watching road traffic were not participating in the excitement. Ch.5 walked toward them with the specific gait of a depths dweller returning to the surface, slow, squinting, slightly lost. It was not a performance. It was memory. He had been that person 3 days ago. He was still that person, underneath the reformed mind and the system knowledge and the conductor's role. The limp was real. The ragged clothes were real. The hollow cheeks and the white-streaked hair and the scarred palm were real. He simply let the real parts show and kept the extraordinary parts quiet. The guards glanced at him and looked away. One jerked his chin toward the gate. Keep moving, not worth the paperwork. Ch.5 passed through the gate. The trap's outermost ring did not fire. The candidate entered the cage-maker's city the way he had entered every dangerous space in 14 months of underground survival. Quietly, carefully, and with the absolute certainty that the most dangerous thing in the room was the thing nobody was looking at. Inside the walls, the city was alive with the Damba preparations. Bunting everywhere, bright cloth strung between rooftops, enchanted banners that pulsed with corrupted encoding patterns, their makers had not recognized as corrupted because the corruption had been normalized for so long that it looked like tradition. The Lunsi drums beat their practice rhythms from 3 different quarters, the competing tempos creating a polyrhythmic texture that Ch.5's reformed mind processed as information and his human ears processed as music. Children ran between market stalls, chasing each other through crowds of adults who were simultaneously preparing for celebration, and unaware that the celebration's cosmic trigger would either heal or destroy the magical infrastructure their entire civilization was built on. The headache spiked, too much data, too many frequencies. He narrowed his system vision further, just the major root line junctions, just the corruption's central axis, just the 3 points of light in the old quarter. The pain eased, marginally. He navigated by the three-part harmonic. Through the market district, where the encoding frequencies were so dense that even his dimmed signal itched with the proximity of 1,000 warped textiles. Through the residential quarters, where shadow bindings flickered behind compound walls like candle flames in a wind. Through the templeway, where the root lines converged at a junction so corrupted that walking over it sent a spike of wrongness through his feet and up his spine, and into the headache that was now a permanent resident behind his eyes. And then the old quarter opened before him, and he saw them. 3 people in an abandoned courtyard. 3 points of light in his system vision, their frequencies interlocked, their combined resonance generating the 3-part harmonic that had been guiding him since the surface. A shadow binding stretching between a young man and something beneath the earth, the bridge, the rejected one's connection to the real enskinment skin. A communion channel humming through a young woman's palms where they pressed against the ground the listener, her frequency reaching down through the root lines toward the Zagale guardians. And a textile pulsing against an older woman's chest, the last pattern, the encoded key, the convergence activator. Ch.5 stopped at the courtyard's entrance, his throat closed. They were the first people he was moving toward instead of away from. 14 months. 14 months of flinching at footsteps, of pressing himself into crevices when faction patrols passed, of making his body small and his breathing silent and his existence as close to zero as a living person could manage. 14 months of moving away from sounds, away from lights, away from every human presence, because human presence in the depths meant danger. He had not walked toward another person in over a year. These 3 people, a young man with a shadow that moved independently, a young woman with her hands in the earth, a woman clutching an ancient cloth were not dangers. They were instruments. His instruments. The orchestra he had been trained to conduct, waiting in the abandoned courtyard of a dying city for a conductor they had never met. He stood at the entrance and let himself feel it. The reformed mind could catalog the emotion, relief, recognition, fear, anticipation, the specific vulnerability of a solitary person choosing to end their solitude. The scavenger could only feel it, a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the sun, a loosening of something that had been clenched for 14 months, the feeling of a door opening from the inside. The young man with the shadow binding looked up, saw him, saw the white streak, the scarred palm, the reformed mind's dimmed but present frequency. His shadow stretched toward Ch.5 independently, the diagnostic array reading the candidate's signature the way a compass needle reads north.
"You're the 4th one,"
the young man said. His voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had been living inside extraordinary circumstances long enough to stop being surprised by them.
I'm the 4th one.
Ch.5 confirmed. The sun was setting. The damba drums shifted from practice rhythms to evening invocations, the preliminary beats that would build through tomorrow toward midnight's crescendo. 2 days, less than 2 days now. Hours, measured in drumbeats and corruption, and the slow convergence of 4 fragments toward a chamber where a trap waited to catch them. Ch.5 entered the courtyard. His signal dimmed. His knee ached. His head pounded with the accumulated strain of a reformed mind processing a world that was louder and more layered and more broken than any human brain was designed to perceive. And behind his eyes, in the architecture the protocol had built around the scavenger it could not erase, the counter-strategy crystallized. The trap's flaw, the modified sequence, the improvisation that would turn the cage maker's own materials against him. The conductor had arrived. The instruments were assembled, the music was 2 days away. And the headache, Ch.5 suspected, was going to get much worse before it got better.